Hi, I'm Brittany, a neurodivergent mum and speech pathologist. This is Not Just Theories, where I share what actually works in my real, messy life. Because life doesn't follow a theory. Here's what I actually do. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Not Just Theories. Today, I'm going to be continuing the mini-series about sleep that we started last week. We talked last week about wake-up time as being an anchor for sleep, as a bit of a biological lever to pull. We talked a little bit about importance of a consistent-ish wake-up time, the power of early morning exposure to light for resetting your circadian rhythm, and we touched a little bit on having some shorter naps throughout the day. Today, I'm going to be talking about something that really complements that, but is at the heart of so many sleep struggles that we had in our family and also some of the people that I know. So any of my friends who've had issues with sleep, this has always been at least part of the explanation. And it's something called sleep needs, which is how much sleep your child actually needs based on their own unique, special temperament. And it just comes down to the fact that so many online schedules are built for a very particular type of sleep needs. And if your child does not need that much sleep, those schedules just will not work for you. Because here's the short version of today's episode. You can stop listening after this if you don't need any more information. And it's basically, you cannot make someone sleep who isn't tired. And a huge amount of sleep distress comes from trying to do exactly that. So I'm going to start by talking about a chart that changed how I understood my children. It's a sleep duration chart that shows recommended, may be appropriate, and not recommended sleep ranges across the lifespan. And when I first saw it, after months and months of struggling, something finally clicked because both of my children, as newborns, fell well outside the average sleep amount that most baby sleep schedules are based on. They needed between 11 to 12 hours of sleep total in a 24-hour period. So they weren't broken, they weren't unwell, there were some medical issues, which I'll talk about in a future episode, but this was within the can be appropriate range on this chart. So it's lower sleep needs. And yet every schedule based around children of that age assumed minimum 14 up to about 17 hours of sleep. Some schedules were actually aimed for the 17 to 19 hours that might be appropriate on the higher needs end of the spectrum. And that mismatch really, really matters, because one of the most important things to understand about a sleep chart like that is this: an average is not a goal. It's not a target. It's not a minimum. And it is not something your child needs to work up to. It is a statistical midpoint across a wide population of very different humans. And when we treat averages as a requirement, we turn normal variation into a problem. This happens all the time with weight charts for babies. So many families can get really concerned about their child's weight percentile being on the 20th centile or the 10th centile or even the 3rd centile. But the actual percentile your child is on is not the problem, because there is a normal variation. Someone has to be on the 3rd centile. The main concern is if they're changing those centiles, if they're not in the centile that we would expect them to be based on where they've been before. And it's the same with sleep. It is not a problem if your child is getting less than that average amount of sleep, if that is consistently what they need. The issue tends to arise if your child used to achieve, approximately the average amount of sleep, and all of a sudden they're not getting that. That might be more of an issue, like with weight gain. So once I noticed it, something that really shocked me was how many online baby sleep schedules aim for that upper end of the recommended sleep range. So for a newborn, 14 to 17 hours. So many sleep schedules, if you followed them, would be giving your child 17 hours of sleep. Some of them even exceeded it and were at 18 or 19 hours in 24. So even for a child with average sleep needs that needed 14 or 15 hours, well within that average range, those schedules can overshoot. So that's for a child with average sleep needs, those schedules could cause issues. But if your child is low sleep needs, combined with perhaps being highly alert or sensory seeking, or just neurologically wired for less sleep, those schedules are guaranteed to fail. Not because you're being inconsistent or because your baby is stubborn, but because the math does not add up. So to make that really concrete, if your child's body needs 10 hours of sleep overnight, but you are aiming for 12, because that's what that 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. schedule says, their body still only needs 10 hours. So how do they make up for that? Your child might wake frequently during the night. They might have a big split night with a 2-hour wake window at 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Or they might rise really early. Instead of waking up at 7 a.m., they might wake up at 5 a.m. Lots of other things can contribute specifically to early rising, but frequent night wakes and split nights tend to be because of this aiming for too much sleep. Your body cannot sleep if you are not tired. It will find a way to get the sleep it needs, and then it will be awake the rest of the time, whether that's lots of short wakes or one really, really long one in the middle of the night. The other thing that can happen if you're aiming for too much sleep is you can have a massive battle at the start of bedtime, and you might be trying to put your kid down at 7 p.m. and they fight it and they fight it and they fight it and they go to sleep closer to 8:30 or 9, and then they get their 10-ish hours of sleep. So those early bedtime battles can be another indicator that you're aiming to go to sleep too soon and aiming for too much sleep. So once that sleep pressure, the amount of sleep pressure that builds over the day to get enough sleep they need, if it's been spent, it's just not there anymore. You can't keep sleeping. And this is where the possums approach that I mentioned last week was so helpful for us, because possums is really clear about it. Sleep is governed by biology, not routines. And the amount of the total sleep across 24 hours matters a lot more than how that sleep is packaged. So they know that long naps during the day reduce pressure for night sleep. Late sleep-ins reduce pressure for night sleep. Early bedtimes don't magically create more sleep. They just redistribute it. So this is deeply aligned with something called the Beyond Sleep Training Project. And I'm probably going to talk a fair bit about this over the next few weeks, because finding this project was one of the biggest game changers for us, because it not only helped us with concrete sleep advice that actually worked for our family, but it helped us understand that we weren't alone in what we were experiencing. One of the core messages of the project is that variation in infant sleep is normal. A lot of parental distress comes from mismatched expectations, and children who don't fit the template doesn't mean that the parent is failing. So instead of asking, how do I help my baby sleep more on this schedule of what I think they're meant to be doing, they invite us to ask, what does my baby actually need? And so that shift alone can really, really dramatically reduce the amount of stress that you're feeling. Because if you are trying to make your baby sleep more than they need because you're feeling like you're failing if they don't get that 15 hours of average sleep, just so much parental guilt comes from that. You've worried that you're not giving your kid enough. But if you can acknowledge that your child consistently just needs less sleep and they're happy-ish with that, I mean, obviously temperament has so much more than just sleep. Happy for your child to whatever happiness means for them, what it means is you're just going to feel less guilt. Because if you can acknowledge my child is getting what they need, and what they need is just different to what other children their same age need, then that is just dramatically less stressful. I'm also going to talk a little bit now about what it's really like to parent a low sleep needs baby, because it does not get talked about enough. Parenting a baby who sleeps 11 hours in 24, split between naps and nighttime sleep, is a fundamentally different parenting experience to parenting a baby who sleeps 15 hours or 17 hours or 19 hours, because that is not a small difference. That is 4 to 8 extra hours of active parenting every single day. That is more than the equivalent of a full-time job in difference of parenting hours. That's 4 to 8 more hours of holding a baby, soothing a baby, entertaining a baby, regulating a baby, being needed by a baby, feeding a baby. And if that baby happens to also be a Velcro baby, highly sensitive, not content to be put down, not very independent, screams anytime you aren't paying 100% attention to them, the load increases again. It doesn't mean you're less resilient or coping badly. It means your day literally contains more labor than what another parent is experiencing. And from everything I hear, parenting a baby of average sleep needs is still more than a full-time job. And I absolutely believe it. Every parent is running their own race. But an extra 4 to 8 hours per day, so times that by 7, 21 to 42 hours extra a week compared to another parent who's parenting full-time. It's nuts. It's so much more work, a full-time job's worth of more work. And so I want to really talk here about grace, because it's important to give grace to yourself and grace for other parents, because if your sleep deprivation is that deep, your downtime is that non-existent, and your nervous system is under constant demand, your threshold for levels of distress is lower. It is your physiology. So if you are at that point, anything can send you over the edge. Something that another parent just takes in their stride is almost guaranteed to send you off the deep end, because you're already operating on so many lower resources, less sleep, less rest, less all of that. So if someone in that situation chooses an approach like cry it out or sleep training, or takes on those more structured approaches, I don't assume they're uninformed or unresponsive, because the actual assumption should be that that parent is operating under an unsustainable load and they are not being given the support they need to parent in the context of a child who is requiring so much more of them than even the average newborn, which is already a lot of work. Absolutely, average newborn who only sleeps 15 to 17 hours a day is a lot of work, but it is just a very, very different amount of rest. So different babies create different parenting realities, and those realities shape the decisions the parent makes. And I am absolutely not going to judge someone for doing something like a cry it out approach when their reason for doing so is probably grounded in desperation and necessity. So I do not want to make this episode about being like, don't sleep train, or this is the only ethical approach, because I really want to have a lot of understanding. I have been there. You know what? We tried a lot of sleep training. It's just that for us, it didn't work. We did all of the things. It didn't work for our kid. And I didn't even try with my second kid, because I was like, it was so much distress for both of us, and involved, not that we did full on cry it out, but we did enough sleep training, and I was uncomfortable with it at the time, but I was desperate. I was so desperate for even 2 or 3 hours of sleep. It's just that for us, it didn't work anyway. So I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. So even though I wasn't really ethically, it wasn't something I wanted to do, I did it out of desperation. Didn't work anyway. So anyway, what I do want to say here is that a lot of sleep struggles can come from unrealistic sleep targets, unrealistic for your baby. They might be realistic for next door neighbor's baby, or, your nephew or your niece. But you can't expect your child's biology to be the same as someone else's. Every child is an individual, and your child is not to blame either. They just are a product of their body. And if they are not tired, they cannot be expected to sleep. Understanding these sleep needs can reduce your suffering, because you can, once you understand your child's sleep needs, work towards a more sustainable distribution of when that sleep happens. If you know that your child needs 11 hours sleep every 24 hours, and you really desperately want 9 or 10 of those hours to happen overnight, you might need to consider reducing their day sleep so more of their sleep needs are fulfilled overnight at a time that you want them to be. So this sort of information about low and high sleep needs, I really want it to widen your compassion for what other people might be going through. This is hard. So when you're thinking about what success looks like for infant sleep, instead of asking, is my baby sleeping like they should, where the should is based on some, average baby somewhere, the more important questions to ask are probably, are they generally alert when they are awake? Are they growing and feeding well? Is their sleep pattern consistent with their needs? Because a baby who sleeps 11 hours and 24 can be just as healthy as one who sleeps 16. The goal is not more sleep for your baby. The goal is enough sleep for the individual nervous system, and trying to time that sleep so that the parents can also rest at the same time. So what I wish I'd known earlier, I think I wish someone would have told me about low sleep needs babies, because it would have saved me from months of self-doubt, some unnecessary interventions like the sleep training we did when my baby was about 4 months old, and also a lot of guilt, because I thought my child wasn't getting enough sleep, because by every average I'd ever seen, she wasn't. But she was awake and alert and learning and hitting her milestones. And I wasted a lot of time trying to put a baby to sleep who was not tired. I spent so much time. It was awful for my back and my wrists, and I had to go see the physio all the time because nothing was working, because I was spending so much time holding and rocking a baby who just wanted to be awake. And if I'd leaned into that, and I would have enjoyed the time she was awake more, instead of having it feel like most of her time awake, I was battling her to try and put her to sleep. So some practical takeaways. Learn from my mistakes. If you are listening and wondering what to do with this information, the starting point is to look at your infant's total sleep over 24 hours. This is the same for preschoolers as well, not just their nighttime sleep. Track how long they actually sleep for over a week, so not including wake-ups or split nights, like how many minutes are they actually asleep a day? And then have a little think about what distribution of sleep might actually work for you. If they need, like my kids did, 11 hours total, and you want at least 10 of those hours to be overnight, then you might need to look at how you can cap naps to be under an hour total. It might mean that if you want a 7 a.m. wake-up time, bedtime might need to be closer to 9 p.m. than 7 p.m. So notice those patterns rather than fighting them. Be cautious of one-size-fits-all schedules that might be aiming for that really high end of the sleep range, which might not be appropriate for your child. And remember that a child who sleeps less does not mean you are a worse parent. It often means that you are working through challenges that other parents are not. It is fundamentally different to be woken 3 to 5 times a night than it is to be being woken 10 to 20 times a night, which is different again to being woken up 0 to 2 times a night. And everyone's reality of what poor sleep might be is different, and people are not honest about what they are experiencing. There's so much research that sleep training in general results in 15 minutes more sleep per night than a non-sleep trained baby. The number of extra wakes often still happen. They might just not be calling out to their parent during that night. Lots of parents have to re-sleep train after regressions. If you're hearing stories about somebody else's child's sleep, then you are hearing stories about somebody else's child's sleep. It is not your child. It is not relevant to your child most of the time. And taking advice from someone who's got a high sleep needs baby, if you have a low sleep needs baby, you are not going to be getting helpful advice to help them sleep, because that parent has probably had to work an awful lot less hard to get their child to sleep. I remember one day I had a parent say to me, well, our child sleeps really well because we have this great routine, and every night we sing them Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star twice, and then they go to sleep after the second time we've sung it. And they were sharing it with me like it was a revolutionary idea to sing a nursery rhyme twice instead of just once, like as if I hadn't spent like 1 to 2 hours trying to put my kid to sleep singing nursery rhymes for literally 60 to 90 minutes straight. And it just really made me realize that taking advice from someone whose baby has such a different amount of sleep needs and such a different temperament was actually the opposite of helpful. I was full of rage that they would even dare to insinuate that after 8 months of no sleep, I hadn't considered maybe singing a nursery rhyme to my child twice. Anyway, it makes me laugh now because I've sort of moved past it. But at the time, honestly, I nearly threw something at them. And I think find a community, a group of people whose children are more similar to yours, or who at least have compassion that your children might be different to theirs. For me, I found that in the Beyond Sleep Training Project. There's a group on Facebook, and it has made me feel so much less alone. Not only have they genuinely provided sleep support and advice for me, but at some of those darkest times where I was feeling just horrendous about how sleep was happening in our house, it just made me feel less alone, because no one I knew in real life was experiencing this significant level of disruption for such an extended period of time. And until you have lived it, you just cannot understand the impact of 10 months of sleep torture. Basically, it changes who you are as a person. I think I will forever be a different person because of my experiences in that time. Yeah, I cannot recommend that group on Facebook enough if you have a child who is not sleeping, just for the feeling of not being alone, but as well as problem solving all the things that might be contributing. So far, like I said, we talked about wake up time, early morning exposure to light, talking about, naps being a way to get through to bedtime rather than a significant source of restful sleep themselves, and tracking that global amount of sleep needs and trying to match the amount of sleep you're aiming for to the amount of sleep your child actually needs. Another area that has been absolutely revolutionary for us, and that the Beyond Sleep Training Project was one of the biggest contributors to us getting it sorted out, were the medical issues that can contribute to poor sleep. That is what I'm going to be talking about in the next episode, because they are a huge part of the puzzle, and they were for us. And it was a major battle to figure them out, because if you do not have a supportive provider, getting answers about medical issues is really hard. So I'll talk more about that next week. But I really hope that, if nothing else, what you've taken from this episode is that your child is their own unique person with their own unique sleep needs, and that give yourself permission to stop blaming yourself for your child not sleeping the way some hypothetical average or high sleep needs child might sleep. Just throw the schedules out of the window, because they are not necessarily tailored to your child's needs. It is so much more effective to be aiming for the amount of sleep your child needs than it is to be aiming for that mythical perfect 15 to 19 hours of sleep. Different babies have different needs. You will have a different parenting experience, and it can be so much more work when your baby is awake more of the time. Isn't as delightful as babies can be. It's a full-time job on top of the already full-time job of parenting full-time, like more than full-time. So thank you for being here, and I hope that you tune in again next week as we continue this deep dive into the various factors that combine to impact on sleep. So talk to you next week. Take care. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to Not Just Theories. I really appreciate you being here. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to follow, leave us a rating or review, or just share this episode with someone else who you think might find it comforting or useful. I hope to see you back here soon.